Hi everybody, my name is Victoria. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my June and July reading wrap up. Let's go ahead and jump into the books. So this summer has been pretty good for me. Way back in the beginning of June, I finished the Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England. I have to look at the title before I say it, and I still messed it up. But this is by Brandon Sanderson. You've probably seen it around the interwebs because his secret project books are everywhere, very popular right now. And this one is quite a wild ride. This one, I liked it. I did like it. It is really fascinating to see Brandon Sanderson do something just completely different. And this is more of definitely a time travel book. It's a little bit more sci-fi. I would classify this much more as sci-fi rather than fantasy, although it still has some fantasy elements. But this one is, I would say, more akin to the kind of humor that you might see in Discworld. And I haven't actually read Discworld, but from what I know about humor in Discworld, I think this would be probably akin to it, or to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I think those are good books to kind of compare this to if you are trying to figure out the tone of it. It's different for Sanderson, but also not different. Like, he does have kind of a zany sense of humor in many of his books, and even Stormlight Archives has some kind of zany humor sometimes. I do agree with a lot of criticisms that I've seen that say this is not his strongest novel ever. Completely agree with that. However, I think it's been getting a bad rap. I don't think it's his worst novel ever either. I had a lot of fun with this one, and I actually think the setting is really fun. I don't think there's any problem with that. The premise is really fun. Humor, I really enjoyed. I think the humor is spot on. What fell flat for me on this one was the character work. I don't think the character work is as good in this novel as what Brandon Sanderson is capable of. I think Trust of the Emerald Sea had better character work by far, but I think I really liked the setting of this one and being in medieval England and seeing what Brandon Sanderson does with that. For a rating, I would give this 3 stars. Probably not a bad book by any means, just not up to Brandon Sanderson's normal standard. But I think I enjoyed it a little bit more than some. So yeah, I will revisit this someday. So if you enjoy books that involve time travel or interdimensional travel and sci-fi elements, I think this would be a book for you. Next up, I finished Moreland Cottage by Elizabeth Gaskell, and this was for Kate Howe's Patreon group, the Victorian Patreon book club that I'm a part of, and it's super fun. I highly recommend joining Kate's Patreon if you are a Victorian literature enthusiast. Moreland Cottage is, I think, more classified as a novella, which I was like, perfect, I have time for a novella. I can do a novella. And I'm so glad that I did, because this was delightful and it made me remember that I really need to read more of Elizabeth Gaskell's work. Only ever read North and South, aside from Moreland Cottage. So I am desperate now to read more Elizabeth Gaskell. So this novel or novella is focused on a young girl who her mom and her brother are who raise her, and mom is a widow, and they are definitely a dysfunctional family. They sort of suppress Maggie. Maggie's the younger one, and then she has an older brother named Edward, and Edward is kind of like lauded by the mom, and Edward can do no wrong, and Maggie is just like, the mom is really hard on Maggie and loves the son, but is just very highly critical of the daughter. And Maggie is just the sweetest little child, and she is just like so pure of heart. And we get to see how Edward develops as the story goes. But Maggie is definitely our protagonist here, and she befriends another family. So their family befriends another family who live nearby, and it kind of goes from there, and it's about how this other family sort of has influence in Maggie's life and how they are intertwined. And then that's all I'll say. It's so short, I don't want to spoil anything. This book is so impressive because in such a short amount of time, Elizabeth Gaskell makes me care. She makes me care so deeply about the characters and about Maggie. And it ends with a bang, I will say. No spoilers at all, but it ends just very unexpectedly and with a good deal of excitement. And it was just a joy to read from beginning to end. And it's not very long. So if you've never tried Elizabeth Gaskell, I think this is actually a good place to start. I think you would get a really good flavor for her character work, for her writing style, which is beautiful. I love her writing. For her descriptive writing, for some of the political and social things that she cares about. There's a little bit of mention, kind of some philosophical discussions that sort of happen on the side. And I think it's just a really good example. It's a good little taster of Elizabeth Gaskell's writing. So completely recommend. 4 stars? 5 stars? I don't know, one of those. Maybe 4.5 stars. I feel like it's too short. It's too short. I wish it was longer. And then didn't know that I think the Mill on the Floss by George Eliot was inspired by Moreland Cottage. So if you are a George Eliot fan and you have any interest in reading Moreland Cottage to see kind of where George Eliot might have gotten some of her ideas, that's a good way to go also. I haven't actually read Mill on the Floss. I have read Eliot before. I've read Middlemarch, but I have not read The Mill on the Floss. So really fascinating. I guess I don't often think about certain authors being contemporaries, but Elizabeth Gaskell and George Eliot were sort of contemporaries, very different writers. But yeah, I'm gonna have to read The Mill on the Floss sometime. Next up, I finished The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, and this was for Tiffany's Patreon book club, and that is also a really fun one to join. I do recommend that also. She reads classics in this Patreon, and it's been really lovely to read with them. Edith Wharton was an author that I really wanted to try for a long time, and I'm so glad that I have. The Age of Innocence is not my favorite book ever. However, I think Edith Wharton is someone I need to keep trying. The Age of Innocence was a beautiful novel, don't get me wrong. I was really rooting for it to be a new favorite for me, but the ending, some things about the ending just didn't really work for me. I wanted a little bit more from certain character arcs. I wanted something different, and it just didn't exactly meet my expectations. So I found myself being a little bit disappointed by the ending, but I don't think this is a bad book in any way. I think it's a really good book. It's really solid, and Edith Wharton is a fantastic writer. She's so witty and biting and sharp, and she was obviously just a really smart woman. The setting of The Age of Innocence is wealthy, extremely wealthy, New York society at the turn of the century, I think between like 1800s and 1900s, right there. It really hones in on how the times change, like older worldviews versus like what is accepted and not accepted in those older times versus what is accepted like 20 or 30 years later, particularly in regards to women and marriage and the family unit. We actually follow a male main character for pretty much the whole book. It's really kind of from his perspective, or we're like following his tale, but the women are at the forefront of the novel, and they are the most important part. They are what spur the plot on, and there is infidelity at the heart of this plot, and for me it has to be dealt with in a certain way, I think, for me to enjoy a book that has infidelity at the center. And I just had a few issues with this book and with the plot and how it wrapped up. So that's unfortunate for me because I loved Edith Wharton's writing, and I'm absolutely going to read some other stuff by her. And I actually own Ethan Frome, so that'll probably be the next one that I pick up. But I think Edith Wharton could be a writer for me. She had me laughing out loud at some parts with just her funny, witty observations, even though it's not a funny book by any means, but some of her just her observations of society and how people act is just so astute. I think in our discussion we were talking about how she was like the Jane Austen of that time period, and I can definitely see the comparison to Jane Austen, just very like socially aware. And Edith Wharton herself was extremely wealthy. She was like high society. So you know all of this is coming from a place of knowing. She knew people who were in these classes, and she knew how they talked and how they thought and how they compared themselves to each other, and just, you know, the drama. So I would love to read more Edith Wharton, and I'm sure I will someday very soon. I also finished Harlem Shuffle by Colson Whitehead. This is my first Colson Whitehead book I've ever read, and I am a little bit sad that I started with this one because I think this is not his best. I think it's not the best example. This is a historical fiction, literary fiction novel. I think it is definitely both of those categories. This is set in the 60s, the 1960s, in New York City, Harlem specifically, and we follow Ray Carney, who is a Black man who owns a furniture store, and he is kind of part of a seedy family. His dad was a major criminal in New York City and ran with a lot of criminal type people. He has sort of broken away from that, and he has like, he's a upstanding businessman, and he owns his own store, and he's also a family man. He has a wife and kids, and so he sort of tried to pry himself away and separate himself from his family background. And then throughout the book, you see how it's almost impossible for him to separate himself when that is his family legacy. And so you kind of see through, I think his cousin or his nephew, now I forget which one, but he has someone in his family who is still involved in crime, and you kind of see Ray Carney being dragged into it again. Ray Carney makes certain choices in his life, and then there's a certain amount of control that he doesn't have, but there's also a certain amount of control that he does have. And so I thought that that was a great idea and premise for a book. Reminds me a little bit of like a Breaking Bad kind of thing, where you often see the character reach a fork in the road, and it's like, okay, what are they going to decide? They can, like, this decision is going to change their trajectory. I think what made me disconnect from this book, despite really liking the premise and where it was going and what it was trying to say, is actually Whitehead's writing itself. Like, it's not hard to understand his writing. It's pretty clean cut and dry, but what I didn't enjoy was the tangents. So I think he takes you out of the story a lot, because we will talk about like Ray Carney being in some situation, but then we're going also on this like thought trail of Ray Carney while he's in this situation, and then he'll be like thinking of the past, and then we're like taken back into the past with him, but like the scene is still there in the moment, like, you know, in his furniture shop or wherever it is, like talking to someone. But then we follow like the rabbit trail while we're in this scene. We know he's physically in the furniture shop or whatever. That's just an example that I'm using. We know he's like physically standing there, but then the writing is taking us like into this thought process, and then it was just taking me out of the story a lot, the way it was done. And I think that's a shame. I don't know if that's going to be a normal thing with Colson Whitehead's writing if I try anything else, but yeah, the execution of this one didn't work for me super well. I think it also just kind of fizzled out. I feel like the ending was just like, and now the book's done. Yeah, it was not well done. I don't think what he wanted to do was really accomplished in this novel. I don't know. At least I didn't get it. So, I'm giving this 3 stars because I think there were definitely things of merit in it that I got, but I don't think this is done as well as I would have liked it to be. So, yeah. It says some important things, and it is very good. And Colson Whitehead is really good at like setting and putting you in the 60s with him as a black man in the black community. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure I jive with Colson Whitehead, so we'll see. Maybe I'll give him another shot down the line, but I'm not really in any hurry to do that, unless you have any suggestions. What is a Colson Whitehead book that is like the pinnacle of his writing that I should try? Like, if I don't like that book, I don't like Colson Whitehead anymore. Because I don't think this was a great example. So I would love to know if any of you have read other Colson Whitehead books. And lastly, I'm happy to announce that I have a 5-star read. It has been a rough year for me trying to find a 5-star book. Actually, yeah, almost none of these were a 5-star yet. So hooray, I found a 5-star book in my life, and I would like everyone to read it. I think it's just so brilliant, and that is Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. And I predicted that this was going to happen, that I was going to love this, because I loved All the Light We Cannot See. I loved his writing. I loved everything about what he does. I love everything about him. This book is hard to describe and hard to give a pitch for. So in this book, we follow several characters, several perspectives, and those perspectives are in different times and different historical periods. So we have the 15th century Constantinople, and so we have some ancient times and some ancient characters. There's 2 perspectives there. We have a storyline that's taking place in the year 2020, and then we also have a future timeline, which is introduced very early on in the book, and then you don't see it for a little while, and you're like, what happened to that future timeline? And then the thing that draws everything together is that everyone's influenced by this certain myth. It's like Greek mythology, and it follows a character named Aethon. And so we get to see how this piece of history, this story, is tied to these different timelines and to these different historical periods. And it's such a wild ride. It's so good. It's so good. It's also a love letter to libraries and to humanity's desire to collect knowledge, to make history stick, and to track the history of people and where we have been and where we are going. And it's just a very large scope book with all these different timelines. It's got a very like global picture that it's trying to give you, and I just thought it was well done. I never for one moment didn't enjoy a perspective. I enjoyed reading all of the perspectives and historical periods that we follow, and that's hard to do, I think. I just think it takes a great amount of skill to pull it off, and I really loved the message of this book. I loved its themes, and I loved how it tied the characters together in this like big global story, and it's just worth it. Again, it's hard to tell you anything else because it's a book you just have to read. So please go read it. It's really good. I haven't heard a ton of people talk about it on BookTube. So there have been some, but not a lot. So I think this is a brilliant book, and it is a 5-star read for me, and I'm so happy. Is it going to be my favorite read of the year? I think it's a contender. I really do. Love this book. Hi, it's me again, slightly future Victoria, because I changed into pajamas and realized that I forgot to talk about a book. So I'm back and in a change of clothes. I forgot to talk about Once Upon a K-Prom by Kat Cho, because I also read that in July. This was for K-Tropathon with Christy and Tiffany and Yoon, and they did this wonderful fun read-along of Once Upon a K-Prom, and I was unable to make the live show for that, but I did read the book, so I did want to mention it. Once Upon a K-Prom is about a young teenage girl who was best friends with this boy named Robbie, but Robbie moved away to Seoul, South Korea, and he became a pop star, a Korean pop star, and he joins this famous, and his group ends up making it really big, like BTS level kind of big. And so she kind of figures like she'll never talk to him again. He's got his own like famous person life now. And he comes back and he shows up and asks her to prom, but she's very weirded out by the whole thing because he has not talked to her in many years. And then all of a sudden he's coming and asking her to prom, and they had made like a pact, like a friendship pact to go to prom together someday when they were like younger, like I don't know, like 10 or 11 or 12 years old or something. And he comes back and asks her to prom, but she's not happy with him because he kind of ghosted her. So that is the premise of this book, and it is sweet and it is predictable and it was cute. I think it's exactly what it looks like. The cover gives you the feel for exactly what it is. I didn't really have anything wrong with it, other than I did think the female protagonist was a bit whiny sometimes, and she would often be a little bit ungrateful to people, but also that is a teenager. That's how teenagers are. They are rather ungrateful a lot of the time. So she really was just a YA protagonist who you know and who you've seen before probably. So it wasn't anything to write home about, but I didn't have really anything bad to say about it. It was cute and fun, and yeah, it has a nice sweet tone to it, and it was enjoyable. I think more so enjoyable if you are a K-pop fan yourself. I myself am. I'm not a professing K-pop fan, but I appreciate what K-pop is and why people like it, but I am woefully uninformed, and I don't know very many things and bands, and I only know like famous BTS songs, and that's about it. So it was still a cute read coming from someone who's not really a K-pop person, so do with that what you will. But I think I gave it 4 stars because, you know, it is what it is, and it's cute and sweet and it's fun, and yeah, nothing more to say about that. So I had to pop on here and give that book review. And those are all the books that I finished in the months of June and July. This video is quite long now, so hopefully I can edit it down a little bit. But yeah, I've been talking for way too long, so it's time to go. But I would love to know if you have any thoughts on these books and what is one of your favorite books that you've read this summer, because I'm always looking for recommendations. Also, if you didn't know, I have recently started a Patreon book club called the Reader's Choice Book Club, and I would love to have you over there. And be sure you're subscribed to this channel if you're not already, and give it a little like before you go. Thank you so much for watching and making it all the way to the end of this video. Keep reading great books, and until next time, bye-bye.